A river swallows Hollywood's cameras and still keeps 40 bodies a year quiet in its rapids. A coal company's waste dam turns a mountain valley into 132 million gallons of black water in under 15 minutes. A red, treeless desert the size of a small city sits in the middle of the Southern Appalachians, so barren that astronauts once used it to find their place from orbit. Every fact you're about to hear is documented, dated, and on the record. This is the geography of Southern Appalachia that the postcards, the tourism boards, and the leaf-peeping calendars leave out. Before we start dropping names, do the obvious thing and subscribe, because this channel exists to tell you what the mountains actually did, not what the gift shop t-shirt says they did. And while you're here, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Every single one of these places has a local who's going to read this and say we got a detail wrong, or that we left out the one that scared them worse. Prove it. Let's start climbing. Number 17. The Tail of the Dragon, straddling the Tennessee and North Carolina line at Deals Gap. This is 11 miles of U.S. Highway 129, folded into 318 curves, a road so tight that the posted speed limit is 30 miles an hour and still isn't slow enough for some riders. The mechanism here is topography weaponized. Blind crests, off-camber turns, and almost no runoff room squeezed between three mountains locals call Silk, Tempest, and Ginger. Emergency responders have said a crash near the far end of the road can take up to 2 hours to reach a hospital, simply because of how remote and winding the access is. Blount County's Sheriff's Office has tracked 27 motorcycle fatalities on this single 11-mile stretch over a decade, compared to 23 motorcycle deaths across the rest of the county's 1,100 miles of road combined. There's a tree at the North Carolina end where riders hang broken motorcycle parts as a kind of running memorial. Locals call it the Tree of Shame. A road built for wagon traffic became a proving ground for egos, and the mountain hasn't lost yet. Number 16, Mount Mitchell, in the Black Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. At 6,684 feet, it's the highest point east of the Mississippi River, which sounds like a bragging right until you're standing on the summit in a lightning storm with nowhere to hide. The observation deck sits exposed above the tree line, and hypothermia remains the leading cause of unplanned rescue up there, even on what looked like a mild morning at the trailhead. The summit is fog-bound for much of the year, with visibility sometimes dropping under 20 miles, and hikers have been caught out in lightning, ice, or sudden temperature drops in every single month of the calendar. The mountain's own namesake, Elisha Mitchell, climbed up alone in 1857 to settle a bitter public dispute with a former student over whether this really was the tallest peak in the range. He went up the wrong ridge, got lost in the weather, and fell to his death from a waterfall while trying to prove his own measurement. He's buried at the summit today. The mountain won the argument and kept the body. Number 15, Linville Gorge, tucked into Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina. Locals call it the Grand Canyon of the East, and the canyon floor drops more than 1,400 feet below the rim in places, through terrain so rugged it was one of the first areas protected under the 1964 Wilderness Act specifically because logging companies couldn't get equipment in. No blazes mark the trails, no mileage signs. The local rescue squad essentially keeps a standing team dedicated to hauling out lost hikers and injured climbers every single season, and fatalities happen most years. Beauty here is inversely proportional to how easy it is to leave. Number 14, the New River Gorge, cutting through southern West Virginia. This one carries an asterisk. It's widely marketed as the second oldest river in the world, though geologists at the West Virginia Geological and Economic Survey actually dispute that specific ranking. What isn't disputed is that it's one of the oldest river channels in North America, old enough to have kept its course as the Appalachian Mountains rose up around it over hundreds of millions of years, and unusual enough that it flows north instead of the typical east-to-west drainage pattern of the region. The gorge it carved runs 1,600 feet deep at its maximum, the third deepest canyon in the country. The bridge spanning it, once the longest steel arch bridge in the world at 876 feet above the water, has hosted legal base jumping every October since 1980, drawing hundreds of jumpers and thousands of spectators to watch people leap off a structure suspended above a river gorge older than the mountains surrounding it. Number 13. The Chattooga River, running the border between Georgia and South Carolina, with headwaters reaching into North Carolina. This is the river that Deliverance was filmed on, and the U.S. Forest Service has logged close to 40 drownings since it started keeping fatality records in the 1970s, averaging roughly one death a year even now, decades after the movie made it famous. Several of its rapids are informally rated certain death if you're unlucky enough to end up in them, thanks to underwater hydraulics and submerged logs, called strainers, that can trap a body where rescuers simply cannot reach it. Before the movie came out, a few hundred people floated this river each year. After, that number jumped into the tens of thousands, and over the past 2 decades, more than 1 million people have run it. The Chattooga didn't get more dangerous. It just got more visitors willing to find out for themselves. Number 12. The Copper Basin around Ducktown, Tennessee. In the 1800s, copper smelting here released so much sulfur dioxide that it killed every tree for 50 square miles and turned the soil into acidic red clay. The result was a treeless, eroded moonscape so total and so visible that it reportedly became a landmark astronauts could pick out from space, alongside the Great Wall of China and the pyramids. It took the Tennessee Valley Authority and decades of reforestation to turn most of it green again. A few hundred acres are being deliberately left barren permanently as a monument to what unregulated industry can do to a mountain range in 1 century. Number 11. Fontana Dam on the Little Tennessee River in North Carolina. At 480 feet, it's the tallest dam east of the Mississippi, built in under 3 years during World War II to power the aluminum industry. Behind it sits Fontana Lake, plunging 440 feet deep in places, deep enough to have swallowed entire towns. Procter and Judson disappeared beneath the water when the reservoir filled, along with more than 1,000 relocated graves. During severe droughts, old chimneys and cemetery stones sometimes surface from the mud. The lake is not empty. It's just quiet. Now, if this list has already surprised you once, do the math on how much worse the top of it gets, because the entries locals argue about hardest are still ahead. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and keep going. Number 10. The Great Smoky Mountains, straddling Tennessee and North Carolina. This is the most visited national park in the country, pulling in more than 13 million people a year. And it also holds more documented missing persons cases than any other national park in America. Over 1,600 recorded between 1944 and 2010 alone, with new cases every year since. The park runs somewhere between 100 and 150 search and rescue operations annually. The mechanism is deceptively simple. Dense rhododendron and laurel thickets that swallow sightlines, fog that drops visibility to nothing within minutes, and elevation swings from under 900 feet to over 6,600, all within a park with patchy cell coverage in the backcountry. 4 missing persons cases here remain entirely unsolved to this day, and 1 vehicle connected to a nationwide murder investigation was found abandoned in a parking area decades ago, its owner never located. The crowds don't make you safer here. They just mean more people find out the hard way at the same time. Number 9. Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, November of 2016. A fire that started small on the Chimney Tops Trail, reportedly sparked by juveniles playing with matches, burned for 5 days inside the park boundary in terrain too steep and dangerous for firefighters to approach directly. Officials believed it posed no immediate threat to town. Then, on the evening of November 28th, wind gusts hit 87 miles an hour. Those winds carried embers over the ridge and into Gatlinburg, and within hours downed power lines were sparking new fires faster than crews could track them, while water pressure to fire hydrants failed as pumping stations lost power or burned. 14 people died. Over 2,300 structures burned, and roughly 14,000 residents and tourists were forced to evacuate with almost no notice. The mountain wind that tourists come for turned a contained forest fire into the deadliest wildfire disaster in Tennessee history in a single evening. Number 8. The Kingston Fossil Plant on the Emory River in Roane County, Tennessee. On December 22, 2008, a dike holding back a coal ash storage pond ruptured overnight, releasing more than 1 billion gallons of toxic sludge across 300 acres, burying homes and choking 2 rivers. It remains the largest industrial spill in United States history, roughly 10 times the volume of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that would follow 2 years later. Nobody died in the spill itself, but of the roughly 900 workers who spent years cleaning it up, more than 3 dozen have since died from cancers linked to the arsenic, lead, and radioactive material buried in that ash. The disaster didn't end when the water stopped moving. Number 7. This one isn't a single location. It's a disease that follows the coal seams through Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. Black lung caused by inhaling coal and silica dust was nearly eradicated by the 1990s after federal safety laws passed in 1969. It has since come roaring back. Federal researchers now report that 1 in 5 coal miners in Central Appalachia with 25 or more years underground carries the disease, and the most severe form, progressive massive fibrosis, is at its highest recorded rate since monitoring began in the early 1970s. The mountain isn't just something these communities live on. For a fifth of its longest-serving miners, it's something they're still breathing in, one lungful at a time. Number 6. Buffalo Creek, Logan County, West Virginia, February 26, 1972. A coal waste dam built on top of accumulated slurry sediment rather than solid bedrock, and inspected and declared satisfactory just 4 days earlier, collapsed after several days of rain. 132 million gallons of black water and coal refuse tore through 17 communities in under 3 hours, destroying more than 500 homes and leaving 4,000 people homeless. 125 people died. The coal company's official legal position stated to the press was that it was an act of God, that the dam was simply incapable of holding the water God poured into it. A citizens' commission investigating the disaster rejected that framing outright, concluding in writing that the company was guilty of murdering at least 124 men, women, and children. Congress passed the country's first national dam safety inspection legislation directly because of what happened in this one hollow. Number 5. Upper Big Branch Mine, Raleigh County, West Virginia, April 5, 2010. A spark from mining equipment ignited a pocket of methane roughly 1,000 feet underground, triggering a chain of explosions that raced through more than 2 miles of tunnel. 29 miners died, the worst American coal mining disaster in 40 years. A state-commissioned investigation later concluded the company had built, in its own words, a culture in which wrongdoing became acceptable, with hundreds of safety violations on record before the blast. The mountain didn't fail that day. The systems built to keep men alive inside it did. We're closing in on the top of the list now, and this is where the danger stops being about any one trail or any one mine and starts being about the whole map. Stick around. Number 4. Chimney Rock and Lake Lure, North Carolina, September 27, 2024. Hurricane Helene dumped up to 19 inches of rain into the mountains upstream, and the rocky Broad River, normally a shallow trickle through a scenic gorge, rose into a 30-foot wall of water that tore through the village in minutes. 45 of the town's buildings were destroyed, nearly a third of its businesses gone. The Lake Lure Dam downstream was completely overtopped, triggering evacuation sirens for 1,600 residents, while engineers scrambled to confirm it would hold. A 535-million-year-old rock formation watched a town 2 centuries old get erased in an afternoon. Number 3. Erwin, Tennessee, that same day. The Nolichucky River normally runs about 2 feet deep through town. During Helene, it rose past 30 feet. At the impact plastics factory, workers trapped by the rising water made desperate final phone calls to family as the flood closed in around the parking lot. 6 of them did not survive. Interstate bridges over the river were washed out entirely. Statewide, Hurricane Helene is now blamed for at least 250 deaths across 6 states, making it the deadliest hurricane to strike the mainland United States since Katrina. The mountains didn't stop the hurricane. They funneled it. Number 2. Eastern Kentucky, late July of 2022. Days of training thunderstorms dropped rain rates over 4 inches an hour onto steep, narrow hollows that have nowhere for water to go but down and fast. The North Fork of the Kentucky River shattered an 83-year-old flood record at Jackson, cresting over 6 feet higher than anything on the books. And a river gauge at Whitesburg recorded a rise more than 6 feet past its previous all-time record before the gauge itself failed. Over 600 people were pulled out by helicopter alone, with hundreds more rescued by boat through neighborhoods that had become rivers overnight. 45 people died, including 4 young siblings swept from their parents' grip in a single instant. It stands as the deadliest flooding disaster to hit eastern Kentucky in more than 80 years. And researchers who later mapped exactly where the victims died found something the news coverage mostly missed. Number 1, it isn't a river, a mine, or a single mountain. It's what's been done to the mountains themselves. Since the 1990s, mountaintop removal mining has flattened more than 500 summits across central Appalachia, blasting off 600 feet of elevation or more with millions of pounds of explosives and dumping the leftover rock and debris, called overburden, straight into the valleys below. The result? More than 2,000 miles of Appalachian headwater streams buried permanently under mining waste, longer than the entire length of the Mississippi River, across a mined footprint larger than the state of Delaware. Researchers studying the July 2022 Kentucky flood took the confirmed locations of all 45 victims and mapped them against known mountaintop removal and valley fill sites nearby. A disproportionate share of the fatalities clustered along streams downstream of flattened, deforested land that no longer had the slopes, soil, or root systems left to absorb a heavy rain the way an intact mountain is built to. The single most dangerous piece of geography in Southern Appalachia isn't a place you can point to on a map. It's what happens when the land itself is taken apart, ridge by ridge, and the water that used to soak in has nowhere left to go but down, fast, onto the people still living below. So now it's your turn. Which one of these did you already know before we said it? And which one did your hometown never mention? Tell us where you're from and whether we got it right, because the places you name in the comments are genuinely what shapes which region we dig into next. If this kept you watching to the end, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you on the next ridge.